You're tuning in to the Black Hollywood Live Network, featuring news, interviews, and commentary on all things Black Hollywood. Hollywood redefined. From Los Angeles, California, streaming live thanks to Akamai Technologies. This is Black Hollywood Live. Justice is served. Featuring the week's roundup and commentary on legal news. Black Hollywood Live. Hollywood redefined.
You're listening to Black Hollywood Live.
And now, the host for Black Hollywood Live, Justice is Served.
Hello and welcome to Black Hollywood Live's Justice is Served, where we bring you the latest in legal news from around the country every week right here. My name is Chelsea Galicia. I am joined today by my co-hosts BJ Abron, Shaka Smith, and special guest, our UCLA law student, Shannon Myrick. Thanks everyone for being here. Let us dive right into this rundown with some good news about professionals being held accountable, shall we? The first story was shocking to me, although I think it's a long time coming, and that is the case of a doctor here in California who has been convicted of murder and sentenced to 30 years to life in prison for prescribing her patients too much pain medication, which led to them overdosing and dying. Is anybody else as shocked as I was?
I mean, well, I think you'd be shocked that the sentencing, that she was convicted. But in terms of, did she deserve it? Of course. So I wasn't shocked, from that perspective. But I think it's about time that we finally seen this happen.
Well, initially I was shocked just because I thought murder, how does the doctor prescribing drugs lead to that? And then you find out that she'd gotten 3 other kind of warnings before this where the patient she'd prescribed these drugs to died.
Right,
so
the coroner was calling up, making courtesy, like FYI calls, like, hey lady, your patients are dying here.
Yeah, and she's largely taking cash payments for the prescriptions. And so now she knows there's a reasonable nexus between what she's doing and their deaths. And so, once I realized that. Yeah.
The extent of her bad behavior, she was a bad actor, and that she was kind of known around the neighborhood as the doctor that would pretty much give you anything if you want it. And she had a lot of young white male clients who are, common heroin and painkiller abusers. Yeah. So she kind of went beyond, just maybe accidentally prescribing too much or not minding the warning calls. She seemed to have been a bad actor.
So these 3 gentlemen who died were all in their 20s. So otherwise would have been healthy, we assume. And they came for pain medication. And what you talked about with the heroin problem is very related, even though she wasn't prescribing heroin.
Yes.
Because what tends to happen is that these people get started on pain medication. Yep. And then when they cannot afford it anymore, will resort to something like heroin.
Yes.
And this is known to have contributed immensely to the crazy epidemic of heroin use and these pain medications in overdosing. I think I heard 44 people die a day of these kinds of overdoses. So this is a really serious issue. And other doctors have been prosecuted for over-prescribing, but this is the first time that somebody's been convicted of murder.
Well, she had specific knowledge that what she had done led directly to the deaths of these patients. So, it was kind of ludicrous that they kind of washed it away as an FYI, your patients are dying.
Yeah. And this is, been painted as this lady who got really greedy. Tax returns show she was making about $5 million a year as a solo practitioner who had a clinic in a strip mall where people would drive from far and wide to come pay cash mostly for a lot of this. Do you feel that there's any sense to, I don't think she presented this as an argument, but I think as a doctor, if you don't prescribe these medications, A, my patient's going to go somewhere else to the next doctor who will, or B, will then resort to heroin. So maybe I'm better off giving them these prescription medications.
You have a duty. You have a duty to uphold what you're supposed to be doing, which is prescribing medicine that needs to be prescribed. You can't think about what the person might do next, or if they're going to go to somebody else and get this. Now, if it's a circumstance where it's on the gate as to whether you can give her this medicine or not, but clearly these are indicators, and based on the individuals who have already passed away and that notification, that clearly this is going to lead, or is highly likely to lead. And to me, her acts were unjustifiable, which we would call to human life.
They take that oath, do no harm, and so that's chief for every doctor. And so
I think this was especially sad too, is that the doctor herself had received calls from family members of these patients who died begging her, please stop, and she said she was just in denial about what she was doing, felt that what her patients did was beyond her control. But how is that they controlled the pen that wrote the prescription? I didn't really understand that defense. Did any of her defense make sense to you?
I mean, I think it's agreed defense. That's really all. When you put all of that stuff together, not to say that I buy it, but when you're greedy for money, you start to create these false perceptions in your mind. To disconnect and disengage yourself from the harmful acts that you're actually doing. And I think that actually did take place. Should we be remorseful in terms of her sentencing? Of course not.
But I do understand in some ways her idea that you are an individual who has your own responsibility. But what she did is she had a position of trust and of care, and she just lost that idea and sense of her duty to that patient. Yeah. She's looking at it as two friends, maybe. There's no actual duty to that person.
It's also the fact that medical professionals sit in a very, serious position of power, and I think it's important that we regulate and check that power. She stands between life and death for many patients. Any doctor does. So I think it's important that we don't let greed, like BJ said, get in the way of that.
Do you think this is a good deterrent for other doctors? Or do you think there's just too much money to be made in these kind of practices?
I mean, I think it's definitely somewhat of a deterrent, but it's not even about the money to be made. It's the safeguard that many doctors have. Like a lot of doctors are just simply protected. They go. It took 3 times where this person was notified, and nothing happens. It happens so often, and I think and you touch basis on that today. This is a message to the day and time and the epidemic of heroin and prescription drug use. That's really what this is about. That's the reason why you're seeing that this stuff is happening today.
And so if enough doctors are deterred, it will slow the amount of medication that gets into the market.
Yeah, I think this story helps, but we've seen more like this, and I think they're really pushing enforcement of cracking down on these kind of doctors. So.
Yeah. All right. So lawyers themselves are also not immune from getting in trouble and being held accountable. This was not a criminal sort of conviction or anything like that, but a prosecutor did get disbarred for lying to a jury. It seems like that should be a no-brainer, but it actually doesn't happen all that often. And
it's hard, actually. It's rarely that it happens. It's so many different things that take place before that happens that you rarely see people like I mean, that's one thing in law school. We go through all of these courses on ethics, but at least our professors, they let it be known that but at the end of the day, it's really hard for someone to actually get disbarred, and it's the truth, and it shouldn't be that way, especially when you see these criminal acts. We're talking about just disbarment, but these are criminal acts that took place here.
Right. So this prosecutor from Texas, his name is Charles Sebasta. He lied and presented false testimony that got somebody in prison for the murder of 6 people. Somebody lit a fire that killed 6 people and got it convicted of this when he knew that another guy did it and that other guy was convicted. And then he had, what was his name? Graves? Is that
Graves, right?
Yes.
So Graves was already convicted, and then he tried to get Graves, or did I get this confused?
He tried to get Graves convicted. The first guy,
Robert Carter.
Yeah, that he copped to it. And initially, it sounds like he indicated Graves may have been a part of it, saying he was leaned on by Sebasta. However, Carter then says, Graves did not help me. I did this by myself. I did this alone. And that's information he never shared with anybody else.
And in fact, presented to the jury.
That just the first part that he was implicated.
And just to be clear on that, once we talked about this on our Making a Murder series, that once a prosecutor has that evidence, exculpatory evidence, he is obligated to turn that over to the defense, and he never, not only did he not mention it at trial, he never turned that information over to the defense at all.
So in failing to say anything about it, this man served 18 years in prison for something that he didn't do.
And what's more, I believe he had a defense witness that he had intimidated. And
the prosecutor did,
Yeah, and the prosecutor told the defense witness that they were being looked at for the murder, and the defense witness got scared and left and didn't testify.
Yeah. I think it's also interesting that Making a Murder is actually getting some credit for bringing some of these stories to light and providing more attention, spotlight on misconduct cases.
I think the public is hungry now for these justice cases, and so I think it only helps,
But that speaks to the power of the media in doing its job and informing the public of this type of behaviors that take place.
And also the viewers who then learn this information and then do something with it. Apply pressure, ask questions, stand up.
And notice Making a Murder was not on a major media outlet. It's through Netflix.
Netflix.
All right, so now, of course, we have to bring you updates on officer shootings. We have 3 of them today. We'll start with Mario Woods. He was shot and killed in San Francisco back in December, but he's reemerged in the news this week because Beyonce did somewhat of a tribute to him as part of her Super Bowl performance just this last weekend. We do have the video here, and we're going to show that. It is a bit graphic.
Yeah, a little jarring, so prepare yourself.
And then we'll have Shannon tell us more about it.
Oh my fucking God, drop! Oh my God, drop it! Drop it! Just drop it! Just drop it! Just drop it! Just drop it, please! Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God!
What's it?
Are you fucking serious?
Stay back!
Are you fucking serious? Are you fucking serious?
Can I get off?
Are you fucking serious?
Oh
Are you fucking serious?
You can cut the tape. Thank you. So when you just look at this, just by itself, what did you think, Shannon?
My first reaction was, oh my, look at this one man. He looks significantly smaller than the officers.
Yeah.
Cornered, what looks like almost a standing fetal position. But then you hear the audio and you hear a woman saying, drop it, drop it. So then I start to dial back a bit and I'm like, this doesn't seem like it seems like a real police brutality case. He may have been a threat. She's a witness, a disinterested witness saying, drop it, drop it. I'm pretty sure she wasn't speaking to the officers. So then that kind of makes me peel back a little further. And then I find out later that the reason what led up to this incident is that officers were called to the scene because it was reported that a man had somehow gotten to the window of someone's car. The person was sitting in the car and they were slashed in the shoulder with the knife.
Yeah.
So that kind of even more makes me doubt back from, this may not be a police brutality case. I think the issue here is now we have Beyonce, who is on a world stage at the Super Bowl halftime show, giving a tribute to Mario Woods. I think there was a sign that one of her dancers held that said, "Justice for Mario Woods." Okay, justice can mean a lot of things. It can mean please fully investigate the matter and make sure that the officers were justified. Or it could mean bring those officers up on charges because they gunned down a man who was innocent. Right. The problem is that I think it's important that celebrities do their research and understand and let the story develop a little bit further before we tie in every single police killing to Black Lives Matter, to the need for criminal justice reform, to the need for better police training.
I agree, but I mean, in watching this video, and again, I agree with most of the things that you said in regards to the video. You don't even see that he has a knife there. So initially, you're just, like you said, he looked like he was in a fetal position. But when I look at the video and I look at any police shootings, not that I'm not concerned about what have taken course prior to that police shooting, I'm looking at that particular circumstance. Was deadly force needed? And with this guy being surrounded, and Shaka, we've talked about this back and forth from several shows, is, why are we always shooting to kill?
Well, but in this story, there was beanbags, I think four attempts at beanbag shots and pepper spray. And apparently he did not react to that.
Well, even if you don't use the pepper spray or the beanbags and you use the actual weapon, the gun itself with the bullets, why do we have to shoot him in the leg? Disfigure this guy. Put him on the ground. You don't have to kill him, and you don't need 6 officers firing 6 times apiece on a situation like that. Another thing is, and I would kind of cross hairs with myself on this one, because we talked about before whether officers subject themselves to harm way.
Yeah.
And you saw the officer in this situation step in front of him, which obviously increases the risk of injury. But because of this situation, I think that was warranted. Many situations it's not, because this guy had already stabbed somebody. I think he was a threat, and you don't want to let this guy just run down the street.
And apparently the
Yeah.
officer was getting in between Mario and a crowd that had gathered.
Right. So that makes
My-
sense there. But I think you still can shoot this guy in his leg, shoot him somewhere. You don't have to shoot to kill.
My initial thought when I saw the video was it didn't matter what had taken place prior. Why is he dead? With that many officers, and I know we hate to second guess their judgment, but he's got one man with a knife, and there's 6 or 8 guys on the scene.
Yeah.
So why is it that he's got to be shot and killed? Why can't he be shot in the leg? Why can't officers have tackled him? Why didn't they have gear to appropriately handle someone with a knife? So many different options rather than ending his life.
I think the issue here is that there is no rule against shooting to kill.
If an officer reasonably feels endangered.
The rule, it's
because
it's
from their position, but we can't prevent them from
that
killing.
But it's still a reasonability test, though. They have to have a reason.
Yeah, but I think that there isn't a bright line rule that says, hey, at this point you can shoot to kill. So I agree, and I think that's one of the reforms, and that's where I'll tie it back to Beyonce and her show being warranted, because yes, he may have committed a crime. Yes, he may have been even a danger, but there are still some situations that we need to take care of, and let's bring light to those. And if we have a national platform, let's do it. Let's use it.
And a lot of times we're bringing people that are not minorities, that are crazy and wielding knives. They're somehow making it to jail, not dying. So.
And in this scenario, both the officer and Mario Woods were African American. Does that change at all the call for justice, or is this really all along has been a call to change police structure,
police culture, and again, we talk a lot of
race.
We talk a lot about a lot of black
combination.
issues, but really those black issues are class issues. And it's just those class issues disproportionately affect some black people.
You were mentioning earlier on your other show that you got to tune into Shaka's
American Crime Story Tuesdays at 10:30, and one of the things, of course, one of the things that was apparent was when OJ was stopped on the freeway, and the officers had the guns drawn. OJ had a gun in the car. And they let OJ go. They let him continue on the chase, even though they had him.
Can you imagine if that happened today?
And I thought to myself, why today? Here, this black man is fleeing, and they don't shoot to kill. But it was because it was OJ Simpson, and there's a couple of lines
And
in
you
there
think maybe
about.
because
think
people
there's-
were
And it was
watching?
so many people
I think we could
watching.
distinguish
And-
these two incidents, though.
No, there were just in general. I'm talking about police culture. Is that it's a class culture. It disproportionately affects blacks. But if you're wealthy, they're going to be far less likely to shoot you. And you're getting these people gunned down in these neighborhoods where I feel a lot of police are thinking this is business as usual, and this will not looked upon as bad conduct.
Well, but this is San Francisco. This is where Oscar Grant, was killed
Right,
several
Subway.
years ago. So San Francisco's got to be at least somewhat sensitive to. They've dealt with the wrath of the public before on things like this.
Now, San Francisco Police Department is very interesting in that is the district where the officer was caught sending racist text messages about black constituents. He had a friend who was a lawyer. The black male was a lawyer married to his white female friend, and he made jokes that he was still a monkey regardless of how educated he was, and that he'd put him down if he had to. And he had been invited to their house for dinner.
Right.
So San Francisco is an interesting place that, from what CNN will tell you or other Fox or news outlets, is that very progressive, very liberal.
Right.
We come out, we protest, and we push every movement. But back to police conduct and police culture, it's so pervasive that even in what is arguably the most progressive city in this country, you have issues of police brutality.
Very interesting. And just shortly before we went on the air, we saw the breaking news about the Department of Justice and what they're doing with Ferguson now. They've actually filed charges.
Suing the city of Ferguson.
Yeah, it's not charges, it's a suit. So do you think that San Francisco needs something similar?
Well, I think it's good that the DOJ is looking at these cases and now investigating these cities. They would need to be a full investigation. But knowing that oversight is there, I think is really going to be a good deterrent for these local police departments to start implementing what they should have been doing for a while now.
And I'm pretty sure the public's attention on these stories was part of the motivating factors for why the Department of Justice has laid down the law.
Yeah.
Certainly.
All right, we'll bring you more on that as we get the details. So then our second story is about Quintonio Legrier. He was killed the day after Christmas. And Shaka will tell you more about it. The I don't know if you want to call it fascinating, shocking, or even disgusting part of this story is the officer's reaction.
Yeah, so Officer Robert Rialmo, who shot Quintonio Legrier, is actually suing the estate for $10 million, saying that he was emotionally, really emotionally broken down and mentally broken down by being forced to shoot Quintonio. And another neighbor actually had been killed by a stray bullet, and her death as well really broke him down mentally. So now he needs $10 million to deal with the stress of having killed these two people.
This story is so very sad because the police were called because the father, Quintonio, called because his son was having emotional mental issues. His son was on some kind of medication, but this situation, I guess he was banging around his room with a bat.
Yeah.
And the dad thought to himself, I don't have the training to deal with this. I better call somebody who does. And he calls the police, and apparently Quintonio takes a couple of swings at the officer, which is why the officer says that he shot and killed him. And then the second tragic part of this is that one of the bullets went through Quintonio and hit the neighbor. I believe her name was Betty Jones. She's 55 years old, and she was killed. By that bullet.
And again, we don't have any footage, but why could you shoot him in the leg? Well, why not, to kill this guy? And it looks like he was suffering from some sort of mental health issue. And the father called the police with that in mind. And so it's here they've actually put trust in the police, and that's what's happening. So I think they need to really reinvest in mental health training for the police, or sending another unit and, channeling that unit out there.
We talk about this whenever we have like a mass shooting. Mental health. Okay, but where is it? It doesn't seem. Everybody's saying we will look at what we're doing with mental health in this country. Well, let's look faster, because this is coming at us in different ways. The police responding to mental health disordered situations and then end up killing people, and then the mass shooters. So there's a lot of reasons to look at mental health in this country.
I think to piggyback on what Shaka was just saying, I think you could easily, for instance, if there's a bomb threat in a building, you don't just send out the regular police. You're going to get the bomb squad who comes out. And I think depending on the type of phone calls that come in, you can assess the circumstance and send out a specialized unit who is particularly skilled in dealing with mental cases, or individuals who have had a history of that type of stuff. And you send those individuals out. I think they will be able to handle the situation, assess the circumstances, or react in a certain way. This guy, yes, he's swinging a bat. He may be a somewhat of a threat. Why is the officer that close to him to where he's swinging a bat at his face?
This is true. The officer said he even felt the breeze of the bat by his head.
You're too close.
He said a mere inches and he would have been struck.
So the $10 million lawsuit, I first of all, that amount is outrageous, and it's like almost offensive. And the officer said that he wants to make a statement or a point that when your family member's involved in an officer involved shooting, that this is not winning the lottery, that he somehow,
I still
so
don't
he's
get
single-handedly
that
attempting to reform tort law, I think is what.
I'm going to tell you this much. When a firefighter, I don't care if somebody sets a fire or not, when a firefighter runs into a building to do a job that he signed up for, why is he suing? So the same thing applies. He doesn't sue, in fact. And in this case, it's the same thing. You signed up to be a police officer, and we hear a lot about police safety and the judgment, and they're under so much stress. I would never sign up to be a police officer. And if I did sign up to be a police officer, I understand that comes with the job. So you don't go to a scene and then sue somebody because of what happened. That's what you got your medical insurance for with your job.
Well, the thing is that we all have. Which state did this happen in? But in California at least, officers, firefighters all get workers' compensation if they're injured.
And so you can.
So this is very unusual that an officer for emotional issues as well as physical injuries are dealt with through workers' comp.
It sounds like he's looking to punish the family and other families who have brought these sort of civil claims against officers by dragging them through the court system with a countersuit.
I think it's about the other family, not even just about this case. The other, he's sending a message.
Families,
I would argue, though, for the officer in this particular argument. I don't agree with the officer as a whole, but his argument was that when if a loved one is shot by an officer, you cannot just sue, and by claiming that was too much excessive force. And I understand that basic argument is that there are probably police officers that feel that even if they have a justified shooting, that families are just suing them and now putting them through litigation, putting their family through things that they shouldn't have to go through because they had a justified shooting. So I got that argument, just that one. I don't think it applies to Rialmo because I just don't agree with that particular situation, but I got the argument he was making was that he was using this to send a message. Just because your loved one was shot by an officer does not make it a wrongful shooting that you have to sue for immediately.
That's a horrible way to send that
But then
message.
the attorneys had a good counter to that and said, if we don't file these claims right away, we lose access to a lot of evidence, or we have to wait a long time for some of this evidence. So to preserve evidence is why you do it right away.
And I think that's where some of the officers why they have that mentality is in the past. I don't think that was a lot of attorneys' method. I think they waited to see what was going to happen in the case and waited for the investigation, and then you sued. And now it's smarter to sue now because now you get access to everything you need.
Right.
And so I completely agreed with their reasoning.
Okay, and then unfortunately there was another similar incident just a few days ago on Monday. David Joseph in Austin, Texas. BJ, you want to tell us about him?
Yeah, so David Joseph, again, it's another unfortunate circumstance. Is a 17-year-old who was killed, and again, this was just on Monday morning. The reports were that there were multiple calls out to police that a naked man, this guy was naked, just to put that clear and on the record.
That's my favorite kind of unarmed man, is a naked one, because there's really not much to fear that he's going to reach into some pocket or something and pull something out. So if anything, as an officer on the scene, I would have felt more safe by the fact that he was naked, but I would also have some indication of there's probably some mental health issues going on.
Yeah. I think that's immediate indicators. Well, it doesn't have to be, but there is definitely a white flag that there might be some type of mental circumstances going on here when you receive those multiple calls. And so he showed up on the scene, and apparently the officer, he gave him subsequent warnings or directed him to act in certain manners, and the guy did not. And in fact, he actually charged. It was alleged that he charged. Again, this is a new case, so the facts aren't clear on this case as of yet. But and then him charging the police is what led to the fatal shooting in which he died from at the hospital.
So this is another situation in which both the officer and the victim, the officer here is Jeffrey Freeman, was also black. Does this change anything, matter at all?
Right. No, I don't. Again, I think it's, and I didn't clarify something before because I don't think that there's clearly a distinction when I say that it's a systemic problem in the police force and not a race issue, because it's both. Now, what the systemic problem is the police force geared to treat a certain race or certain races a certain way, and that's how it bridges together. It's not just separate. Now, when I say it's not just the race here, when you see a black guy killing a black guy, that could be racism as well. But it's that institutionalized processing that comes with being a police officer, where you target people. For instance, we just talked about this drug reform with heroin and what's going on in the hospitals and this doctor. But back in the day, what happened in the inner cities when there was drugs, and I'm talking about weed. Obviously, it was cocaine. You can call it marijuana, right? And so you it wasn't just sending certain people. They went and busted down walls to get people who were selling marijuana, and that's targeting a certain race of people. That's not happening where heroin is being sold. That's not happening where these prescription drugs are being sold.
What I used to think is, well, police are going in and arresting these people because these people are using marijuana, but the studies show that races, all races use, black, white, Latino, they use drugs in about the same proportion.
No. The studies show that whites use it at a substantially more proportion than any other race. That's what the statistics have actually shown. Other races kind of balance out, but whites use it. It's no question. It's way higher rates than any other race, and this is across the nation. That's what's alarming about that war on drugs that Hillary Clinton pushed.
Oh, hey there.
By the way.
Political plug right there.
Okay.
Nice.
Somebody over here is feeling the burn. I'm not mad at that.
It's all about Bernie.
All right. So now let's look at some sentencing stories. a couple of some interesting stories here. But the first one, a little more serious, but I want to know if you guys think this is a step in the right direction. So the Supreme Court has just ruled on what's constitutional for the sentencing of juveniles. They just said on Monday the 25th, man, how did we miss this? That sentencing juveniles to life without the possibility of parole is cruel and unusual punishment, and so it's unconstitutional. Just a couple of years ago, they said life without parole is unconstitutional. So I guess the difference now is sort of they expanded upon the situations in which basically in no case now, whether there's murder or not, can you sentence somebody to life in prison without the possibility of parole if they're under the age of 18.
Yeah, I think there was some question as to whether the previous case was systemic or procedural. Until now, this case makes clear that this relates to everyone that's even still in jail now. So that
it now applies retroactively.
Exactly.
That was the biggest part
so
of this
about
last
2,000 juveniles will be affected by this and can now, or they're probably not now in juveniles anymore, but people can apply for parole now. Yeah. And this is sort of in keeping with the steps over the years of reducing the severity of punishment for juveniles. In 2005, the Supreme Court said that death penalty is unconstitutional for juveniles. And then in 2010, they said life without parole was also unconstitutional in cases that didn't involve murder. So now this says, even in cases with murder, it is unconstitutional. What does this say about the Supreme Court, the direction it's moving? Do you think this is closer to justice?
I think it's going into, to me, these are one of the, every now and then you see some laws and you just like, duh. Like, how has this not been the case, right? Mm-hmm. If our prison system or the complex is supposed to be geared after rehabilitation, then what more of a person can be rehabilitated than a child or a teenager who has committed a crime before they hit the age of 18 and realize certain things are more important than others, or just was hit with the realities of life? What more person can be rehabilitated than these people? So they should have never been.
I think it's also important to understand that these are baby steps in actuality, because all this does, this case and the case before it was applied retroactively, is take away mandatory life sentences. Because usually in certain states, you murder someone or felony murder, in the course of a robbery, is mandatory life. Now it just allows defense attorneys to introduce evidence that, hey, this person was a minor. Science has told us recently that their brains are not as developed. They are the best candidates for rehabilitation. But that still would allow a judge to hand down a life sentence.
Right. Yeah.
It just doesn't allow them to make it mandatory.
Right.
And then if they did not give a life sentence, they may just give sentences that are effectively life. If someone is 17 years old,
you give them 50 years.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah,
right.
It's damage.
So it is
67 years old.
It's small step. Yeah. You think it's in the right direction, BJ?
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't say it's a big step. It's a duh.
Yeah.
And, I think it should have been that way. We should have progressed a lot past that, but I definitely think it's in the right direction. But it's a small step that did need to occur.
Shaka, you got anything? Any thoughts on that one?
Step in the right direction, I think,
I just hope that we as a system now use this opportunity to attempt to rehabilitate them. There are some stories of rehabilitation, but I think there's room for a lot more effort to try and rehabilitate kids especially. All right, and then now we're going to talk about the story of a grandmother who faces mandatory sentence of 6 years for kicking an officer in the shin. At first read, this sounded ridiculous to me. I know Shannon too also thought that, but Shaka, not so much.
Yeah. Well,
I'll let Shannon introduce the story.
I think initially I read the story and I'm like, gosh, wow, like how could a kick to the shin? Was he bleeding? Probably didn't break a bone, right?
Right. He even testified that it didn't even hurt.
Yes, he testified it didn't hurt and it did not leave a mark. But the problem is that once we actually look at the case, and I'll let Shaka explain more about her background. But with a battery, as we all know, because we took torts, blowing smoke in someone's face can be a battery.
Offensive contact.
And then you add the fact that it was against an officer, it's certainly going to be a felony. So I'll hand it over to Shaka, but I'm still a bit shocked.
Yeah, and with battery, there's no actual harm that needs to be suffered. You don't have to be in the hospital or crying. Basically, she's getting the 6 years because she's under the third strike paradigm of the state. And you find out that in 87 she committed armed robbery, 97 she had another felony, 2003 another felony. And so when I see the history, and I see now in 2014 here she is again, I think you are the person that should be acting like a church mouse. You should be doing your best, walking the straight and narrow. You already know that you have knowledge that this is a possibility if you continue to break the law. And getting in a scuffle with an officer is certainly breaking the law. And so I had no sympathy for someone that's a repeat offender, a repeat felon.
This is no armed robbery.
But keep in mind, she had a scuffle with another officer in prison.
And then in prison, she continued to fight in prison. I mean, she's a fighter.
I don't think she woke up that day and was like, I'm going to have another scuffle with the officer because it's been 2 years and I'm itching. She came to the courthouse to see her son for a sentencing hearing, so she's obviously probably not in the best emotional state.
She ends up in a scuffle with an officer, and I think if you know that you're a past felon, you got to do your best to really walk.
I think she may have struggled when she was being arrested, which happens often. And from the way the officer described it, it could have just been like she thrust her leg up slowly and it connected with his chin. Right. I think that's where I have the problem, is like the sort of injury cause. And that's sort of my issue with three strikes law altogether.
Exactly.
Something else pushed by the Clintons.
Yeah.
That's true.
Exactly. That's the major one.
That's where I hesitate.
Bill Clinton. Yes.
But do I have actual sympathy? I would say no.
Yeah, this to me seems like one of the cases where the law is not necessarily.
I'm concerned about the slippery slope more than anything. How far do we go with this?
I'm completely against the three strikes rule, just because to me it's against the 8th Amendment. This is cruel and unusual punishment.
So she's being punished now for something that she already did time for.
That's the fact that if she done time for it, what does that mean? That means that she has paid her debt to society.
No, she hasn't paid her debt for this battery yet.
Well, no.
Oh, okay.
But you're convicted based upon the statements that you just made. Yeah. You want to convict her not on his injury, not on severity of what took place, not on how it took place, based upon what she has done in the past.
No. I want to convict her for the battery she committed. I want to sentence her for what she did in the past.
So you want no?
Yeah, that's why I want to sentence her.
That's what we have to align at the conviction.
I mean, it is true. We can look at past history to mitigate sentencing.
This is the way. But here, let's look at this a little bit more pragmatically. And this was a state crime, so this was in where was this? Was this Chicago? So my tax dollars won't go to pay for this, but the taxpayers of Chicago are going to pay for this woman to sit in jail for 6 years. And is that really keeping the streets of Chicago safer?
I think quite possibly.
She won't graze no one else's shin.
I think taxpayers could possibly respond with the fact that any other person with 2 strikes looking to get into a bar fight or any sort of incident, this is how low the bar is. You could nudge an officer in the shin and you get 6 years. So taxpayers may say, hey, this might be money well spent to make an example.
It's a deterrent.
I don't know.
And I think she's been committing felonies with some regularity since 1987.
Look, I think
they're like 20 years apart.
No.
15
28 years. Her first felony is older than me. I want you to know that.
It was 87, 97, and 2003, and now 2014 another incident. So she's committing these felonies with some regularity. I think putting her in jail for 6 years is probably.
I don't know what the regularity is.
Decades. It's hard to say regularity.
Right, that's hard. That's a stretch.
A felony. I haven't had any felonies. I mean,
congratulations.
A felony a decade. I think
for
that's
now.
Too much.
Watch your foot when there's an officer shin around. Watch your foot.
Oh man. All right. This one, I think hopefully we can all agree on. There was an officer found guilty of raping a woman, a 75-year-old woman who had suffered a stroke. He got into the care facility that she was being treated at several times. The woman told her family, in single words, because this woman couldn't even speak. She mentioned the word police and she mentioned the word rape, and so then they installed cameras to oversee the entrance and exit to her quarters, and they saw a man go in just days after they installed these cameras, and they identified it as a police officer. police officer is then tried for rape, and he says, oh, no, we did have sex, but it was consensual. We had a casual relationship that included sex. What happened with that?
Well, yeah, I mean, he's found guilty of rape, thankfully.
We all agree on this one, yeah.
Yeah, we had the videotape, we had everything, and so yeah, it's just disconcerting. Here's someone who needs help the most. Again, she's suffering from a stroke. She's got aphasia. She can't speak, and an officer took advantage of his position of power.
It's very interesting that the fact that she can't speak is kind of like what damned him and what also allowed him to do the crime, because he knew she couldn't speak. But now we know she couldn't give consent because she could not speak.
Right. Yeah. So how?
Because yes means yes now.
Yeah.
Right. So,
no means no.
Yeah. So his sentence, oh man, it was sizable. I don't remember what it is. Does anybody else remember what it was?
I don't recall, but this woman was 75 years old. I mean, we talk about rehabilitation, and when we talk about rehabilitation, a police officer, as far as I'm concerned, and I think a lot of people can be rehabilitated, but in this situation, this guy pried on a woman that's 75 years old. You
And
can't rehabilitate
He
that.
was like,
that's ridiculous.
There's like a 30-year,
ridiculous.
there's a 30-year, I think, if not more, 30-year age difference between them. I mean, did the officer present evidence that they knew each other before she had the stroke and had some sort of relationship? I can't.
But I wouldn't go
he was
so,
sentenced to 62 years.
Yeah, but I wouldn't go so far as to say he can't be rehabilitated. I think
that might have been a little stretch,
Yeah.
but I think I was kind of.
Yeah.
We appreciate the passion.
It's a horrible crime, but I think we in this country we need to always start from a point of rehabilitation if possible, so that we start implementing these things in our prison system that at least get at the majority of people. But if we start just like saying that person's not rehabilitated, then they're not able to be rehabilitated, then it's that slippery slope. Where do you stop?
Well, the thing we need to do is start rehabilitating.
Yeah.
That's what we need to. We're not doing that. We're throwing people, locking them up, throwing you in solitary confinement. That's gonna make you worse. How's that gonna help you?
All right. Well, thank you everyone for the lively discussion today. Shannon, we love having you. I hope you come back
for having
soon.
me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I love my usual crew, Shaka and BJ.
Congratulations on Entertainment Law Review.
Oh, thank you.
That is
So
a big
excited.
deal in
Huge.
the law school world. So
Yes.
congratulations on
Yes.
that. And don't forget to join us next week on another episode of Justice is Served.
Download us on iTunes, 5 stars,
Comment, likes.
YouTube, Twitter.
Thanks, guys.
From executives Kevin Undergaro, Dario Kristen, Tiana Hobson, and the entire BHL staff, we would like to thank you for supporting Black Hollywood Live, the first online broadcast network dedicated to African American entertainment. For questions and comments, contact us. info@blackhollywoodlive.com. Like us on Facebook, tweet us, or Instagram us at BHL Online. And I am the official voice of Black Hollywood Live, Scipio. Instagram me at KingXOBay. Thanks for tuning in.
Hollywood redefined.
The views expressed here are those of the host only and do not necessarily reflect the views of BHL or its owners or principals.